Hello and welcome to Social Media for Humans, the podcast that empowers you to do social differently. Your host, Alexis Bushnell, and her guests discuss their experience of social media as business owners, users, and ultimately humans, with insights and advice to help you find an effective and ethical strategy that works for you. Grab yourself a drink and join the conversation.
Hello. I am here with fabulous Sarah. Do introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do.
Good morning. My name's Sarah Browning, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a kindness cheerleader and communicator, and I work with organisations and individuals who have a vision of a kinder world.
That is a fabulous job title. Kindness cheerleader. Tell me what that means to you.
So I guess there's a couple of things. Some of it comes from the fact that I work with organisations and individuals to help them communicate their messages more clearly. So some of the cheerleading comes from that piece of kind of raising people's voices, helping them to raise their own voices. And also the cheerleader aspect comes, it's probably only in the last 12, 18 months that I've described myself in that way. I think I've probably been acting in that way for a lot longer, but I've described it that way because kindness is so important to me. And I have come to realise that actually there is an awful lot of kindness in the world around us. We just don't talk enough about it yet. And so part of my mission, I guess, both in terms of kind of professionally and personally, is about amplifying those stories of kindness, shouting about it, helping to help those that either are not able to see the kindness in the world or perhaps are less, I don't know, perhaps less confident about seeing it maybe. It's about amplifying those stories and showing them that it is there, and the more we see it, the more we talk about it, the more we will get, very much from the basis of there's a lot already. I'm not denying there's lots of horrible stuff going on, don't get me wrong, there is, but it's about the balance of that narrative and what we talk about and where we put our focus and attention.
Yeah, kind of like a look for the helpers situation. When people say, you know, something awful happens, look for the people who are helping.
Absolutely. And you know, what's been really interesting, I'm not a driver, but I imagine if you drive and you decide you want to buy a red car, then you see red cars everywhere. And in the same way, you know, as I have become more and more aware of how important kindness is to me, and I think I probably have a more natural leaning towards looking for it anyway, but the more I have looked, the more I have seen. And actually, I mean, one of the stories we published on my Time for Kindness Instagram website and socials and all the rest of it. One of the stories we posted was around a friend of mine who was at a shopping centre and saw a little old lady waiting on the other side of the automatic doors, and people were streaming through, and the poor lady couldn't get through, and then my friend let her through. And I think it's very easy for people to focus on all the ones who didn't let her through, whereas actually, if you see somebody letting them through, then that's where you can put your focus and notice that did happen.
Yeah, you are so right. And I think especially with the news cycle, I was going to say at the moment, but it's not even at the moment anymore. It's just the news cycle forever. Yeah. It is really easy to see all of the bad stuff. Yeah. And also, of course, the news you don't get the good news on the news at 6, do you? You know, it's all like, here is all the heinous things that you need to know are happening in the world. And so I do think a lot of people at the moment have realized how difficult it is to cope with the just constant onslaught of bad news.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing is amazing, because I do think we need to look for those good news stories and those kindnesses and the good things that make us human.
Yeah.
Against that sort of backdrop of, here is all the reasons humans are awful.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that drives me and that worries me is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, we've sold ourselves collectively, or whatever, this idea that humans are awful and we're all going to hell in a handcart. But actually, and part of that, I think, within that is this idea that kindness is the same as weakness. And it really isn't. I think it's, you mentioned there about the kind of what makes us human, and it's that shared humanity is what kindness shows and kind of brings to the fore, and that's incredibly powerful, actually. You know, it's not weak, it is powerful, and it's what connects us all. And there is something about, you know, wanting to believe in that, and partly on my website, when I talk about kind of who is Time for Kindness for, you know, it's for people who believe in kindness, but it's also for people who want to believe in kindness, but perhaps are a bit unsure and a bit unconfident about whether, you know, they are being silly and fluffy and weak. And so some of I don't know if I would describe myself necessarily as militant about kindness, but at times it feels that way. You know, which isn't to say I also get sucked into the negativity sometimes, and the downward spiral, and that's really horrible and really hard. And you know, it's certainly not. I'm not wanting to set up in any way to criticize people who get caught up in that, because it is so easy. And again, I think there is something about that kind of being conscious of what you're consuming, what you're looking at, what you're engaging with, and so on and so on. That if you want to, and if you are able to, you can make a choice to change for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes people are not in a position to be able to do that, but actually, even if you can do it just a little bit, just a tiny bit, just see one story that's a bit more positive each day, or a bit kinder each day, then it starts to build up and become something bigger, in my view of the world.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Actually, I watched a video from Hank Green about the sad gap the other day, which was really interesting, because he was saying how when there's sort of a curve of when we learn about a new issue, or there is a new thing going on in the news, where initially we don't know about it, and then we become conscious of it, and we only see all the bad things. And then as we learn more about it, we start to see the nuance of it, and that it's not all bad, and that actually there's a lot of work being done to improve it, and there's all these new businesses starting up, and grassroots organizations working towards changing it, and things like that. And that then gives us that balance. But he was saying that the way the news cycle, and also of course social media, work is that we are always on the sort of up of that. We are always taking on new things, and we never dive into dive deeper into them. So we never get over the sad gap to the side where we're like, oh, okay, it's not all awful.
That's interesting, and I guess there is the clue is in news, perhaps, the sort of new bit, and it is. I mean, you know, you were saying we don't get any positive stories in the news. Actually, we do, and what I have found, again, since kind of actively looking for things, the BBC has a positive feed page or something. I can't remember what it's called. You know, it is there, but it's not headlined in the same way. So actually, it's very easy to just miss it if you don't actively go looking for it. And I guess I was listening, so I've been listening recently to the Anatomy of Kindness podcast by Claudia Hammond, who's involved with, at the University of Sussex, they're running a big public research project called the Kindness Test, in conjunction with Radio 4. And I've been listening to the podcast recently, and I was listening to it this morning. And one of the podcast, they've had different themes, you know, each week or whatever. And the one I was listening to this morning was around can bosses be kind, which was quite interesting. And they were talking about the negativity bias, that if you ask somebody to tell you a story about a boss that they worked for, they are far more likely to tell you about a bad thing that happened with a boss than a good thing. And they may have lots of good things that happened, but somehow, again, I mean, I don't know the science of it, but somehow we seem to have developed somewhere along the line, or maybe it's always been there, this kind of negativity thing. And, you know, in some situations, you do need to see the bad to protect yourself, as it were, the whole kind of safety, you know, all that. As I say, I'm not a scientist, so I get a little vague at this point, because most of my stuff is on gut instinct. But I think that there is something about that kind of what we choose to look for, or even we may not be making a conscious choice actually, but what we are looking for. Again, it's kind of the story that we tell ourselves and others, and then it becomes self-fulfilling.
It's interesting you say about that negativity bias as well, because I think that shows up a lot on social media, where people are like with brands, people are much more likely to send a tweet because they had a bad experience with a brand, to leave a review because they had a bad experience with a product, than the opposite, than if they had a great experience. People so rarely shout out about that. And I think that it is so frustrating, especially for small business owners,
Yes.
because it's really difficult to get people to leave reviews
Yes.
if they've had a good experience. So I do think that shows up in social media a lot, which I think kind of plays into that sort of reason that so many people are anti-social media and like social media is just bad and it's all negative. But I mean, that is absolutely not true from my experience, and I would imagine from your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of this thing is that we seem to be in an age of absolutes somehow. So you know, social media either has to be good or bad. It can't be somewhere in the middle or both. And you know, the same with kindness. People are either kind or they're unkind. Well, no, that's not true either. So, you know, kind people do bad things and vice versa. So I think there is lots of good around social media in terms of the work that I'm doing, because it's good. I am seeing stories of kindness on that are shared. I think you're right, they maybe not shared quite as often necessarily, but also of course it's a way to reach out to more people. So when I do find the stories, I do tell my friends and family, but I think the point at which I realised that I'm obviously perhaps getting a little bit obsessed was my daughter came home, she's 14, came home from school saying she'd helped a younger child at football group who had a problem with their football boot laces, and she'd helped undo this kid's laces. So that's lovely, that's really kind. Did you get a photograph? At which point I got the eye roll and the, oh mum, for goodness sake. So but you know, so I do, but social media means that I can share that to a wider audience, and that they can then obviously share it on as well. What is interesting, I think, is that pretty much everyone I tell that I'm doing this, I think almost everybody, if not everybody I've said to about it, says, oh, that's such a good idea. Getting them then to take the step to follow on social media or to engage with the website or whatever, I think is the next stage that obviously I need to work on. But again, it's that thing, isn't it, of taking action, taking a positive action. We mean to, we just don't necessarily get around to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think again, it's especially like everybody's busy, and the positive things tend to be the ones that we put off, like the self-care, the looking for the good in the world, the slowing down. It's those things that we tend to shelve when things are busy and stressful and overwhelming. Which is interesting because I think at this point we all know that those are the things we need the most in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's the same, isn't it? We all know that we should be eating 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. Do we? Realistically, probably not. So yeah, there is something, isn't there, around that. Yeah, we know it's good for us and it will be a good thing. Sometimes, I mean, I know that I receive a few different newsletters that are around positive news and happy news and that sort of thing. They're always the ones I read last. And the reason they're the ones I read last is because I sort of want to save the nice thing to the end, if that makes sense. It's a bit like having the thing you like best in your dinner, leaving that till the end, isn't it? It's a little bit like I kind of want to savor it. Actually, sometimes what happens, of course, is life gets in the way and I don't actually get to it. So I probably would be better just to read it first. So I think there's all sorts of complex things going on, isn't there, in people's heads around kind of what we choose to do and when we choose to do it. But with the best of intentions, sometimes things get missed. You know, we're all human, aren't we?
Yes. I want to come back to when you were saying about asking your daughter if she'd taken a photo, because I think this is something, it comes up a lot around like virtue signaling and social issues and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's true of just generic kindness, shall we say, in that there is a set of people who would probably say if you are like documenting it, then you're not doing it out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing it to show how kind you are, to shout about what an amazing person you are, and for the sort of external bigging up.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose so. First of all, time for kindness. I'm very adamant that this isn't about saying, "Oh, look at Sarah, isn't she kind?" By and large, I think we get that balance right. Obviously, some of the stories are things I've done, but it is about amplifying stories. But I think the other thing, it's really that somebody asked me the other day about, had I experienced any of that sort of virtue signalling, kind of do-gooder accusations, and I haven't so far. I suspect that is partly because the reach isn't big enough yet. I imagine at some point we might start to get some of that. But I think there's a whole load of things within that, isn't there? One of which is actually it's genuine and authentic. And you can call me a do-gooder, but actually, what's wrong with being a do-gooder? Not what's wrong with doing good, rather, I should say, because I think do-gooder as a term is rather pejorative, isn't it? It has become to have that meaning. But actually, I think it is authentic. I know I am not doing any of this to show off to others. Therefore, I'm comfortable with that. I have wobbles sometimes, of course I do, but by and large, it's a genuine, authentic thing. And I have found, as I have been more open in talking about kindness, in all sort of ways, actually, but for example on LinkedIn, which obviously I use from a professional point of view, and I have done for years and years, but the lens I talk about my work now is much more through kindness. I get far more response to that in terms of "Oh, Sarah, I've seen the stuff you're doing, that's fantastic," than I ever got when I just talked about communications. So again, I think there is something about connecting with people and using that kind of language to connect with people. And I think there is this sort of idea that if you do kind things, it has to not, you don't get a benefit from it. If you get a benefit from it, then that somehow negates it. I think it's complete nonsense. Actually, why shouldn't it be a win-win? And it is true that whatever, kindness can be very, very small. And actually, a lot of what we put on Time for Kindness are the much smaller kind of everyday acts of kindness, because there are so many of those. But actually, even if you're just on your morning dog walk and you see somebody and you smile and say hello, be a kindness if they're having a bad day. But actually, that again, that kind of connection and that doing something with somebody, helping somebody pick up their shopping if they drop something in the supermarket, those kinds of things, it does give you a boost, because it is good to do something like that. It is nice, and I personally think there is nothing wrong with that. I think where it becomes a problem is when it does become performative, and I think it's what is interesting at the moment is kindness is definitely having a moment, in the sense that more and more brands and people in the public eye and so on are using the language of kindness, and I'm sure for a lot of them that is genuine, but for some it isn't. For some it will just be the hopping on the bandwagon. So I think it is right to sometimes kind of question, okay, so you're using this language, but this is how you're treating your employees or whatever. I think, well, it doesn't quite add up. But I would argue that is a minority overall of all the kindness that is going on around the world.
Yeah. And I think for me, the differentiation is actions versus words. Like, if you are talking about kindness and how kind you are and how, you do all these kind things, but you're not actually doing them, that's where the line is for me. It's very much like, if you are taking the kind actions, then shout about them. I don't care. Go for it.
Absolutely, because kindness is active. I agree with you. It is something to be done. And actually, the other thing as well is, as you say, if you're shouting about it, then about the action and what's happened, you can inspire other people as well. So just reading about it can be uplifting, but it can also inspire that, oh, I could do that for my neighbour. Or actually, there's that family that's just moved in down the street that look different to everyone else, I'm going to go and say hello to welcome them. You know, there's all sorts of different things that can give you ideas that you may not have thought of yourself, or like I said earlier, been a bit kind of embarrassed and shy about, well, I don't think I want to do that. And then if you hear about other people doing it, you think, actually, yeah, I want to be like that too. So yeah, I'm with you. Let's shout about it.
It's interesting as well that you say that you've had a lot of good feedback on LinkedIn, because I think LinkedIn definitely has a reputation for being the place where if you're not posting about sort of business and deep thinkings about certain things that are business related and certain very, very specific topics, that you will get a lot of pushback and a lot of this isn't Facebook and stuff like that. You have clearly not had that situation. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've seen more of that more recently. That type of both in terms of the kind of what you might call more personal, and then the pushback against that. I guess one of the reasons is probably because I'm talking to an echo chamber, my own echo chamber. So there is an element of that, I think. I also, I guess, I do talk about kindness in a slightly different way on different social media channels, actually. So and where I introduced myself at the start as a kindness cheerleader and communicator, and on LinkedIn I am definitely kind of both, and I am talking about the kind of work that I do, or that I'm interacting with the things that other people are doing, in that sort of professional way through the lens of kindness, if that makes sense. It makes sense to me. I'm not sure if it makes sense quite, but I think that there is something about, and again, because I am not saying, hey, look at Sarah, I'm kind, look at what I'm doing, I think that might be different as well. But I think I do share stories on LinkedIn. They tend, stories of kindness, they tend to be resharing things that other people have already put on LinkedIn, as opposed to me having posts that are just about kindness stories. I think for me, that would be the line that wouldn't quite feel right in that context. Although, having said that, I mean, I put something on last week about kindness to self when I'd been for a long bike ride and I'd taken the day off work. But then that one did cause me a moment of pause before I pressed publish, because I did say, oh, I took the day off and my clients knew what was going on. But I thought, you know what, actually, for me, because I work for myself, maybe it's different if you work for yourself, I'm not sure. I've been working for myself for such a long time that LinkedIn wasn't really a thing when I was employed, so I never really used it as an employee. But I think, because I work freelance, and I do that because I like the entirety of my life, if you like, is kind of my professional and my personal are combined, and the kindness and other aspects of the way I work are personal values as well as business values. So it's cohesive, and I think some of that maybe comes again back to that authenticity thing, that I'm clear. People work with me in my professional capacity because, yes, I'm good at what I do, but also they enjoy working with me. And so in that case, they have to know who I am. They have to trust me, and they can't trust me if they don't know me. So I do have to sort of share a little bit more about Sarah in an entire sense. But it is a balance. And I think, there are things that I see on LinkedIn that I sometimes think, oh, not sure if I'd have shared that. But actually, it doesn't really matter whether I would share it or not. I think if the person, it feels comfortable, and to them it makes sense and it helps and it is serving some kind of purpose. I mean, I think very often my take on it, when I see things that are very personal, is it usually does have some kind of connection, either to saying, look, we're all human beings, this stuff happens. Yes, I'm a professional as well, but this stuff happens, and if it's happening to you, I hear you, I see you, and I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think that there is something there around the way in which you I guess the lens that you use to talk about that personal stuff. But I think it's an interesting one. And for me, it feels like something that has definitely changed in the last, I don't know how many months, but more recently, certainly. And I think some of that also is off the back of the pandemic, because suddenly we were all at home with our dogs on our laps and our children coming in to say hello and all of that kind of stuff. And actually it became somehow more acceptable to be a whole person. And that's one of those things for me, that's a good thing that's come out of the awful time that we've all been through, and that actually there's a lot of value in keeping that going forward, I think.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that there has been an increase in maybe appetite for good news since the pandemic started as well? Because I from what I have seen, there has been a shift in what people are looking for and the sort of conversations people are having towards much more authenticity and we are all human and stuff like that. And I wonder if that has also sort of shifted towards a want to see the good news and the happy things and the look, actually there's some good stuff going on in the world.
Yeah, I suspect it has got something to do with that. And I think there is something about hope maybe as well. Kindness and hope is something that is on my very long list of things to kind of explore further and do more thinking about, and then share more content about, actually. And certainly it's hard, isn't it? Thinking back to where we were 2 years ago, now we're in this kind of, it's all back to normal kind of place, as it were. It's already quite hard to remember what that was like 2 years ago. That actually, that were very dark times, obviously, darker for some than others, and depending on your kind of your personal circumstances and so on and what have you. But nevertheless, I think there was something about needing hope and needing to look for those positive things, as well as the fact that there was a lot more, again, more in some communities probably than others, but there was more of that reaching out and helping others, and albeit at a socially acceptable distance, and so on and so on. But I think that it just, something huge like that, I guess, does just change everything. And certainly I've been working with these kinds of organisations my whole, not my entire career, but most of my career. But it is only since kind of late 2020 that I've expressed it as kindness. I used to talk about wanting to work with organisations that wanted a better world. And in late 2020, I think we were all thinking, well, what the heck is going on here? What do I really want from life? What is really important to me? And in that context is where it occurred to me that actually I say better, I mean kinder, and I'm going to be more open about that now. And for me, I think there was an element of, it did feel brave to start with, because it did feel a little bit like, am I going to get logged on LinkedIn? Am I going to get kind of shouted down? But actually, that need for more kind of positivity. I talk specifically about kindness, which I think positive news is bigger than just kindness. But I think that there is definitely, I guess with any content, it's only going to be well received if people want it and are looking for it. So I suppose this is a very long way to answer your question, that actually it must be that there's more of an appetite for positive and kind news. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so well received.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. The audience needs to be there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know about it pretty quickly.
Yeah. The double feed going across would tell you.
Yeah. There are going to be a lot of people, I imagine, like you mentioned at the beginning, who are feeling kindness is fluffy, kindness is not important, or possibly scared to look for it, maybe in case they don't find it.
Yeah.
What would you say are some sort of baby steps, I guess, for people who are like, I don't really know about this?
Absolutely. follow time for kindness might be a suggestion, because we definitely have kindness stories. So if you're worried you're not going to find any, definitely come and find us. Bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer, really. Because I guess first I would say I completely get that, because there is something in terms of either taking kind actions or even to some extent looking for them, that's about vulnerability. Because and like I said, when I first started talking about it more, it did feel like quite a brave thing to do, because I didn't know how it would be received. But I think that's starting to look for the helpers, like you said. It is a first step that you can take, because the stories are there, and it does become a virtuous circle as well. The more you see, the more you look for it, and you see, you see other things. And I think, in terms of kindness, sometimes people can think it has to be something big and some grand gesture. Actually, it doesn't. There is kindness in really small things as well. So, like I said, just kind of smiling and saying hello to somebody on the street. But again, I appreciate there are people for whom that isn't possible, because you don't go out on the street, or you're concerned about that kind of vulnerability. So there will be other things that you can do. And I think actually one of the good things about social media is that possibility to find your tribe and find communities. And actually there's a lot of kindness within just getting involved in a group that shares your interests. If you've got a hobby that you enjoy, or a TV program that you like, or whatever, sometimes just complimenting somebody on there, that's an act of kindness. Or recognize, you don't even compliment them necessarily, or recognizing them on there, or saying, actually, yes, I agree with that, I hear you. All of those kinds of things can be quite small, depending on the kind of the context of how you live your life. There will be something that you can take, that small step. I spoke on a radio program last year, I think it was, around kindness and gratitude, actually, and the host of that is somebody who has had a very dark past. And one of the things that she was talking about was, actually, if you're in some awful situation, how do you start to see kindness? How do you start to find gratitude? And actually, I think sometimes it's that kindness to self thing that perhaps is the kindness that you can apply, if you like, in terms of sometimes just getting out of bed is a big deal, and you shouldn't underestimate that. And that, being kind to yourself, to recognize that you made yourself a cup of tea today. There are all sorts of things. I think it is a question of finding something that is, might feel like a huge step. Don't listen to the voice that's telling you, well, that's pathetic, you just made a cup of tea. Actually, acknowledge that voice, let it go, and focus on the kindness side of that, to be kind to yourself. And then again, I do believe it becomes more of a virtuous circle, that once you feel stronger in yourself, then you might feel brave enough to do something for someone else. But actually, if you don't, that's okay. It's what is right for you and your life, and no one else knows that except you. And I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you talk about sort of the community aspect of it, I think it's important for us all to remember as well that part of the point of community is that sometimes we are giving and sometimes we are receiving.
Yeah.
And we don't always have to be doing the kindness. Sometimes the kindness is allowing other people to do it and just receiving it.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult in itself, but I think it is important to try and sort of reorientate how you're sort of seeing things, to realize that it doesn't always have to be you doing the thing, and equally it doesn't always have to be you receiving the thing. It is a balance. And actually, from sort of my own experience, I have suffered with quite severe depression, and I tried a gratitude journal many years ago now, because it was the big thing at the time. Everybody was like, gratitude journaling cures depression. Spoilers, not true. But I tried it, and I found made me dramatically worse.
Right.
Because not only was I so depressed I couldn't think of things to be grateful for, it added a layer of now I feel guilty because I'm so selfish that I can't think of anything to be grateful for. And so for me, it was giving kindness in those instances, because it is so much easier, or it was for me, it was so much easier to be kind to other people than it was to myself.
Yeah.
But like you say, it does start to create that circle of, because if you're giving kindness, you know there is kindness in the world. You know it exists because you're doing it.
Yeah.
So I think some of it is also just checking in with what is making sense to you, like you say, like what do you need and what is not helping you, and being okay with showing yourself that kindness of, this is not working for me, this is not helping me, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do it, I'm not going to push that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often say that I think one of the things that would be great would be if we could ban the word should. It's quite difficult to talk about that without using the word should, actually. But you know, I think that there, as you say, there's a lot of, or this is what you should do. This will help you. And actually, it doesn't help everybody. And there is something about, as you say, recognizing what's serving you and what isn't. And that will be different for different people because we are different. We are different individuals, and that is hard when, particularly if you're unwell. You know, it's hard to recognise that and see that. And the point at which, so when I started Time for Kindness 18 months or so ago, it was a nice idea. I thought, you know, I'll have a bit of a go. I'll sort of play with it, see what happens. And the point at which it became apparent to me, and I thought, this is too important not to do, was somebody I know, I don't know them very well, but I had met them through local networks and things, and I hadn't seen them for a while. And then they got in touch with me via LinkedIn, actually, and in private message, and said, I've seen what you're doing. I knew that they had a very a lot of difficulties with their mental health, and they got in touch with me and said that they had been in an incredibly dark place, and actually it's the kindness of strangers that saved them. And they said, if you know, I've seen what you're doing, please don't stop doing it, because when you're in that dark place, it's hard to see the kindness for yourself. So you reflecting that, I can see it's there even if I'm not well enough to engage with it at the moment. And as I say, that was the point. I thought, this is too important not to do. And you know, as I say, it's always been important to me, but that was when I thought, yeah, this is a kind of my commitment to keep doing this and keep building on this, because I mean, it still makes, you know, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It you know, there is something about holding that space for people if they can't do it for themselves until they are ready. So there's a lot built in this, not within Time for Kindness, but it is important, I think, to have something there for other people if they're not able to themselves.
Yeah. And I think that again comes back to that giving and receiving, and the importance of, when we are able to see the kindness ourselves, sharing it with other people, telling other people about this kind thing that you saw today, or this kind thing that you did today, so that it becomes that normal part of conversation, and you're not always talking about, did you see this thing on the news, this awful thing on the news, that actually part of those conversations you're having with the people around you is actually, this really great thing happened today. I saw this person pick up somebody's bag for them and put everything back in it and send them on their way again. And things like that, like we need that, and we need to share that more.
Yeah.
And it is so important, I think, that when we are in a place of being able to see that, of becoming conscious of how much we are sharing of this is important, you need to know about this, versus this is a nice thing, there are good things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I love is when people, and this is starting to happen, but when people are coming to me kind of proactively saying, I thought you'd like to hear about this, I saw this thing happen today, I'd like that to happen more. I'd like to sort of get to a place where we've built on that and done that more, and in a funny sort of way, where it isn't happening so much, other than, as I mentioned, with my daughter in the football boots, within my friendship circle, actually, and my family, because we don't have those sorts of conversations very often. They know that Sarah does this thing, but actually, you know, some of them do. But again, it's that sort of needing to encourage people to take action. And one of the actions is, tell me what you saw, tell me what happened. And if you can get a photo, all to the good. If not, we'll get one separately. But again, I think, and actually with my daughter, it's interesting because we went up to London last week, and unbidden, she pointed out to me that she'd seen somebody give up a seat on the tube for someone else, and she was like, oh mum, there's this kind of, so I think again, it's that thing of you know, getting into that habit of, as you say, spotting, well, as I said, kind of spotting the things, but then talking about them, and you know, you don't have to tell me about it, but you know, telling your friends and family about it or whatever, because it becomes a natural part of the way we live our lives. Then we're not thinking about something consciously that we have to have on our to-do list. It's just part of who we are and how we are.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that you say your daughter has been sort of the main person who has really sort of taken that on and is sharing things, because I do think children especially, it's not weird to kids to be kind, and they are much more adaptable to things like that. So I do think, actually, if you have young children in your life, it can be really useful to talk to them about kindness so that they start sharing stuff, and it gives you a nudge.
Yeah.
So because I think as an adult, we are so conditioned and programmed, and we've been in this sort of adulting professional world for so long, where it's like, no, kindness is mushy and silly, gotta focus on this, gotta do that. That to have that reminder from children where they're like, oh look, they're doing this over here, just to remind you, so that you're like, oh yeah, that's so cool, can start to help you readjust your own view of things as well.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking earlier about that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and kind of narratives that we've sold ourselves, and actually this idea that children are cruel is one of those, in my humble opinion. You know, this idea that children are all mean to each other at school, that isn't true necessarily. What I think has been interesting, so one of my favourite days of the year is the Kind Fest, online festival of kindness, which is on World Kindness Day, 13th of November, I think it is. They, over the last couple of years, have had quite a few speakers talking about schemes that are working in schools with primary aged children around kindness and developing kindness. And very often, actually, with children of that age, it's about helping them have the language to articulate, so that they might do things naturally to help a friend or whatever, but they don't necessarily have the language to see that as kindness. And one of the blogs on the Time for Kindness site is from a head teacher of a junior school, and they have kindness champions, and she talks about how kindness is actually written into the curriculum in various ways. But then I'm yet to find anything. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, so if anybody listening to the podcast knows of something like this, please do get in touch and tell me about it, because I'd like to see that carry on with teenagers, because actually I think the challenge for teenagers, and it's one of the reasons that I think my daughter is quite remarkable in many ways, is that that's the age when you feel really vulnerable and really self-conscious, and you know, so often you want to fit in, and you don't really know who you are, but you don't want to be different to anyone else, and that kind of thing. And so I think I'd like to hear, as I say, if anyone knows of any kind of schemes that help teenagers to have that confidence in continuing, because again, when you're feeling vulnerable and if you're worried something's weak, then you're not going to go there. And yet actually, again, self-fulfilling kind of narrative that we've sold ourselves, that teenagers and young people are all, you know, out on street corners doing God knows what, also not true. yes, that is the reality for some, but actually for so many more, you know, they do all sorts of positive things, and all sorts of different stuff going on. We just don't hear those stories very often either. So, you know, at some point, I would like to bring more of the kind of youth voice and young people's voice into Time for Kindness, because at the moment, it's me and people like me, quite frankly, which is great. We're good, but there's a lot of us. So I'd like to bring in different voices as well. But that's, you know, that, as I say, very long list of things to think about, do bring in at some point.
Well, if people would like to be one of those voices and they would like to share their own story of kindness, or indeed see all of these stories of kindness, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram, which is at time_for_kindness. There's also Time for Kindness page on Facebook, and timeforkindness.co.uk is the website, which has all the stories and also has blogs and my kind of professional services as well.
Very good. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk about kindness till the cows come home. So if anyone wants to get in touch just for a chat about kindness, I would love to hear from them.
Fabulous. I will, of course, put all of your links in the show notes so people can find you very, very easily. They do not have to remember where those underscores are. Thank you again.
Thanks very much.
If you want more regular reminders to find your own way to use social media, follow Alexis on your social platform of choice. All the links will be in the show notes. Until next time, be a human.